to you from the Paris of the Midwest. This is your Daily Detroit for Tuesday, October 18th, 2022. And as you can hear by the chants at the beginning of the episode, this is all about DCFC. That's right. Detroit City FC has made it through their inaugural season, finished 7th. That means they're in the playoffs. I'm Jer Stays, and across the table from me to help unpack it all, Fletcher Sharp. Good to see you, sir.
Yeah, I was right, by the way.
Yeah, I was thinking about that before we started recording. I'm like, oh man, you were pretty much on target.
A lot of people were like, they're not making the playoffs. They're not doing whatever. Charleston's better than them. These other teams are better than them. Only better than the MLS 2 teams. And like, I was like, high seed probably finish, 5th or 6th, most likely 6th, probably like near the end, probably the last in playoff spot, which I thought was 6th and not 7th. That's on me not knowing the league. I'm like, low end, probably finished just outside the playoffs. And they literally finished exactly on the last spot, close to being outside of the playoffs if Tulsa wasn't as bad as, whatever. So I was right, and I want everyone to know that I was right before we say anything else. I was right, and my nickname moniker sticks, and you should all clean my flip-flops.
Well, I'm not doing that, sir. But I will mention that 29 points separate Charleston Battery and Detroit City FC. Charleston came in 12th this year, above only Atlanta United 2 and New York Red Bulls.
So they were the worst organic team in the league.
Yes, 100%. Let's talk about that match, though, on Saturday. This was not City's best performance. It was kind of like a truck backing up into the playoffs as opposed to steamrolling in.
Or like someone going down a water slide the wrong way and they get out of the water and their bum's a bit red. They're all confused because they went down the wrong way and they're like, what happened? It's like, yeah, you fell backwards, man, and that's kind of how they fell into the playoffs. I'm sure they're happy to be here, but it really was apparent from the beginning. One team was very happy to be inside the playoffs. The other team was happy as well, but they did not want to play a specific team. So they came out focused, looking to make sure that they got a better matchup. And unfortunately, that team was from Miami and not from Hamtramck. But again, not to sound all sad and down, but it was really good to be in the playoffs for the first time in your team's history, especially when you're missing a few key parts.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we have to remember that match, we were missing Stephen Carroll, missing Brad Dunwell. It's just not been a great lineup for us, and I'd rather miss them against Miami and then miss them in the playoffs. And this will mean that Miami gets to have a inside Florida playoff matchup, which should be a lot of electricity for them.
Yeah. I mean, not to mention they've also been missing Devin Mensah from the beginning of the season. The goal that was given up by Detroit against Miami, I don't think would have been given up had they had their full strength. For this one, typically people like to single people out. It was entirely the 3 center backs' fault. First ball came in that bounced. Carl Ouimet got very aggressive to get after it. But either you get aggressive and you win the ball or you foul somebody. You don't get aggressive and then miss the ball and the person, because at that point, everyone's caught with their pants down. Ball bounced again. Matty Lewis tried to get in the way of it again. Ball bounced over him. Missed the ball and the person. Finally, Michael Bryant is tracking backwards. He sees the ball roll towards somebody. He runs to the person who's going to maybe receive a pass and not where the ball is going. And they teach you in soccer, always stop the ball. Always stop the ball. If it means someone's being left wide open, then that means it's someone else's fault, not yours. But if you see the ball rolling and you go to somebody else, it's now your fault. And unfortunately for Nate, who I think is the best keeper in the league, for this reason alone, I know they compare him to Kyle Morton of Louisville and Jordan Farr of San Antonio and saying, well, they're better. I don't necessarily think so, because their defense has been consistent the entire year. Nate's has not. He's been facing a lot of shots he should not need to face and having to make some saves he really shouldn't have to make. And that's why his save percentage is a bit lower than theirs, because he has a lot of confusion in front of him. Really great, talented players, but at times it looks like they're still adjusting to playing with each other. Yeah, that goal happened and it stunk, and Detroit kind of said, all right, well, that sucked, until like the 75th minute. And by that point, Miami was very content to just get fouled, fall down, be a little bit hurt for a second, get back up, go and play, boot the ball down the field, then rinse, wash, and repeat. Ball comes in, go down, especially their captain, Paco, who is very happy to, he gets hit. Oh no, my shoulder. It's like, you got kicked in the foot. Oh, my shoulder. Oh, I'm good. I'm all right.
I just got to make a mention, though. Like, Miami is not the greatest team in the world. Why couldn't we gin up any kind of offense from anybody? Like, this isn't one I think we can put blame on any individual player. We were able to get very little started, and possession was way in Miami's favor.
Hunger. That's really it. One team came out like, we're doing the best we can. And you would think that Miami was used to playing in Michigan weather, the way that they played, and that Detroit City FC was from a different state, because Miami got in there and said, we're going to get after it. And when it's really cold and blustery, you got to just dig in. Like, it's almost like 3 yards in a cloud of smoke if you're playing American football. You just got to get in there and say, you know what? It's going to suck. It's cold. I don't like it. But we got to get in there, dig in, and move forward. And there are times where Detroit didn't really do that until late. Yazid had some really great plays late when he came on, helped put some injection into their offense. But at that point, it was kind of too late. At that point, when you're like trying to press really, really hard, and the other team only just has to sit there and hoof the ball back up the field, it puts too much stress on you to have to be perfect versus, earlier in the game. It stinks. Again, losing's not great, but losing when you can't get knocked out of the playoffs is not the worst thing in the world. It'd be a lot worse if they would have lost and then Tulsa jumped over them, but that's not the case.
And I think it's better to be more conservative with your players and not as you're going into the playoffs. Let's look a little bit past this match. We learned that Nate Steinwascher gets the black arrow, rides the bike. I think completely deserved.
I think he's the best goalkeeper in the league. And I know from earlier in the year, was not what I was saying earlier, and nothing against him. But I think he has to do a lot at times more than people really should do in his position. And for the most part, he handles it with aplomb. There's been a game, maybe a game or two they've lost specifically because of him. I know of the Louisville one before. Made a bad pass, ball got stolen, they scored right after it. I know he blamed himself for that. Save for that, though, you really can't look at moments and say, wow, Nate's cost us a game. Typically, you're in the game because he's making amazing saves as an undersized keeper that he really should not have to make at all. So for him to get this award to be the best player of the year for this team, it makes a lot of sense.
100%. I think that if Devin Amumensa had continued the rest of his season, I think it would have been a tighter race. But in retrospect, I know there were a lot of people you could have the conversation with. But in retrospect, now that he is the Black Arrow winner, I really can't think of anyone else because you're absolutely right. Not only did he make saves, but he was an engine for the offense. Like, you get it back to him. It was almost like a pinball machine where like you hit the flippers and knock it back out again. Nate has great placement with all of that.
Not to be devil's advocate because I hate those, but if Devin Amumensa is healthy, Nate doesn't have all the saves he does because the ball's not going to be back there nearly as much. So maybe,
is that devil's advocate or is that just facts?
Depends who you ask. But maybe if Devin Amumensa is there, Nate doesn't make as many saves. Maybe he's not the clear-cut winner for Black Arrow.
Fair. Let's look ahead. We are in the playoffs. Memphis 901 FC going down to AutoZone Park in Tennessee.
It's humid, as the commentator said 90 times during the broadcast. They got to watch out. It's humid. Uh-oh, look at them sweat because it's humid. Look at the way their jerseys stick because it's humid. They don't have humidity like this in Michigan. It's humid. So, as you should know, probably going to be humid.
Was that a little snark there, Fletcher?
I'm all for telling people stuff, and I understand when you tune into broadcasts, it's like, oh, you might have missed something earlier, but for every time you're like, oh, here comes Detroit, look at them huffing and puffing because it's humid. Okay, man, like, we get it. You live in Tennessee, like, relax.
Let's talk about this match honestly. I will set the table by saying I think Detroit City FC can win, but there is a lot that's going to have to go right for them, and they can't make mistakes.
Yeah, I'll be very honest. I preferred for them to play Tampa Bay, mainly because Tampa also makes some mistakes that Detroit makes. I know they have a lot of pressure, but they are prone to making critical errors. Memphis is not. They are coached by someone, as everyone knows, is very familiar here, in Ben Pierman, who drills his teams to not make mistakes. They might not be flashy. They might not be scoring a bunch of goals, which they have scored a lot of goals, but one thing they will be is very, very strict, very, very within form, and very, very smash mouth type of play. And if you let them put their foot on your throat, they will put both feet on there and their hand over your eyes. I am concerned because the last time they were down in AutoZone Park, that's exactly what happened. Memphis dictated the pace of that game. It was only 2-0, but it felt like it was like 30-1. I know earlier in the season, Memphis tied Detroit and Hamtramck 1-1, and people were like, this is a good start. My one thing I will say about that, Aaron Malloy, who finished with 8 goals, 10 assists, right behind Edwin Hopino, who won the assist award. He's currently the highest rated player in the league at 8.06, the most man of the match awards of the season with 13. He had not been having a great season so far. Philip Goodrum at that point had only had like 2 or 3 goals. He finished 1 goal behind Milan Ilovsky of Orange County SC with 21 goals. Very, very good. He's also an irritant. He has 10 yellow cards. He's someone who wants to get in your defender's face. He wants to make you like annoyed. He's also the same guy who potentially broke Devin Amumensa's nose. He's claimed accidentally. We'll say it was, but he was like, why is he on the ground? Give me the ball. But they have players who weren't firing at the time they played earlier, who are very much firing on all cylinders now. And that worries me because playoffs is about who is in better form at that moment. Who's riding the wave then? You could win only 3 games and draw like 80 and lose 10. But if you get to the playoffs and you've won 3 games in a row, you're now dangerous. You see the NCAA tournament all the time. These small mid-major schools are like, well, they just barely squeaked into the tournament. And all of a sudden, because they've won 5 games before, they're feeling it and they just keep winning and winning and winning. So playing against a team that's really like catching the wave right now scares me.
I hear what you're saying,
Yeah.
but I am encouraged by the idea that Detroit City FC, annoyingly, they play the reverse of what's expected, right? Like if Detroit City FC won a couple more games this year that they should have won, it's a different playoff calculation completely. We might even have a home match. Frankly, if we win against Red Bulls, we win against a couple others. But they like to step it up against harder competition. And if Detroit City FC can get ahead and contain Goodrum in the offense, I think there's a real chance if they play the defensive game. If this turns into a shootout, we are in trouble.
Oh, definitely. You have to hope that you get to dictate the pace and slow it down. To Antoine Hopeno's point, again, assist winner for the league, which is a great thing. He had 11 assists in the year. A stat that I find amazing for him is Detroit City FC is of the 14 teams in the playoffs, including the East and Western Conference. Detroit City FC by far has the lowest amount of goals for their team at 44. Antoine Hopeno, leading the league in assists with like the team who has the least amount of goals in the playoffs, shows that he pushes the ball to everybody. They have no one on their team who has over 10 goals. It's literally you get some, you get some, you get some.
And how many goals does Goodrum have right now?
21.
So that gives you an idea of how different our team would be with a good scorer.
Aaron Malloy has 10 assists. I am fairly certain at least 6 or 7 of those are because Philip Goodrum got a chance to either flick the ball in or just tap it in. You'll be seeing a very different game. If Detroit can dictate the pace and try to slow it down and maybe counter when they need to counter, it's good. The problem is, like what you said, where they play stepping up against harder competition, not so much against not as good competition, is if you're hoping for that, it's like cramming for a paper. He's like, I'm good at writing papers. I'll wait till the night before and I'll just bust out, an A- or whatever. And it keeps working for you. Then eventually you do it and you fall asleep on your notebook and you wake up and it's 8 a.m. and you're late to class and you have 2 words written and you get a very big F. Eventually it lets you down. We're going to hope that doesn't happen here. There are ways that they can win. As you said, focus defensively. Ben Pierman drills his team to be very, very serious, very, very on task. They're tied for 8th in fouls through the entire league with 67 and only 21st in yellow cards. Something even better than that, Detroit's tied for last in yellow cards, the least amount of yellow cards in the entire league. And they're one of 3 teams that has no red cards. None. And that, honestly, I am surprised to read that fact because I would have assumed at least, maybe Michael Bryant or maybe somebody would have picked up one near the end of a game. But nope, no red cards, which is great to see. So defensively, they need to just stick with it. We've said and shown many times that Memphis has a much better offense. They are 1st overall in rating, 2nd overall in goals. Defensively, though, is where Detroit will make their bones, as Detroit is just as good of a team defensively as Memphis is defensively and offensively. So as long as they stick to what they do best, counter, bend and don't break. The last game they played in Memphis, things were going okay, a bit back and forth until that last free kick goal came in from Malloy off the head of Kerry Buckmaster into the net. Once that happened, you watched the players kind of hang their heads a bit like, dang. And for the rest of the game, it was 1-0. But you could tell they weren't trying to press and get goals in there. And then when Philip Goodrum scored that goal at the end of the game, you saw them all just deflate entirely. So as long as they can just keep their composure, not get too emotionally wrapped up, which having someone like Richard Foster come on now will definitely help because he's played in games, which, not to be disrespectful to this game, he's playing in games I'm sure have a bit more on the line than, say, 2nd division soccer in the U.S., playing in Scotland where people will fight in the stands, people will fight the players. Very serious stuff there.
I think that's an extra dimension that he brings to the team that I think is needed because sometimes the team slips a little bit with that. And if you can have that steady hand, that will help a lot.
I mean, you see in other sports where you have a coach in the field. He's like a coach in the field. It's literally having a coach on the field as he's also on the coaching staff. So to have someone who might be a little bit fiery at times, he has more yellow cards than he should in the limited amount of games that he's played. But to have someone who's fiery like that, someone who very much will help try to contain the emotion and kind of keep you on task, they'll be very helpful. They have Cy Goddard, who's back to help, adds an extra dimension. They also didn't have Yazid at the time either, who has another dimension offensively, gives them another way to go. Yeah, so it's not all Memphis. It's not going to be 95-0, but it's going to be a very hard game.
We've mentioned a few names already, but who else on the club are you looking for to step up? Like if you see them and you're like, if they have a really great game, this is going to be really good for us.
Maxi's got to be more. He's been great this season, but he's got to be more at task. He's got to be more offensively ready to go.
Maximum Maxi.
We need Lade Jope to stop shooting the ball from outside 18 yards. Like no more. I hate to say this, but like put a shot collar on his leg, and if he goes to shoot, zap him. Do not let him do that. If no one's open, tell him to pass it back to someone and say, hold on for a second, because they were making some chances to come back in the game against Miami, and he took a shot from outside 18 yards and almost struck supporters who were right next to him. That can't happen in a game like this. That's such a combo breaker where you're like, oh, pass it back, pass it back, pass it back. What are you doing? Do you see his teammates hang their heads like, bro?
On the other side, I'll also mention we can't fall into the ticky-tap trap where there's so many touches, and sometimes the club gets a little bit caught in that. A defense like Memphis will tear that apart.
See, I understand that. You can't fall into that when you're behind. When you're behind, you have to start putting some offensive pressure up. But when it's 0-0 or you're up, I'm totally okay with that because it keeps you within your own game. Detroit's game is short passes, side to side, and then counterattacking from the wing. So we pass it back and forth. Maxi to Lay, Lay to Brad, Brad to Maxi, Maxi to one of the wings back to the center back to Maxi, Maxi turns, Declan or Reese are sprinting on the side. I find one of them. Or I hit it up to Connor, who then takes a touch, looks outside, feeds it to one of the wings, who crosses it in. That's okay. When it's tied or you're up something, that's fine. When you're down, you need to start getting some more offensive pressure. Start getting the ball more vertical, less horizontal. But I still don't want Lay taking a shot from 20 yards out. I looked at his stats. I love him. He's got intensity defensively. He's a great box-to-box midfielder, except for the shooting part. But he has 3 shots on frame this entire season, and I can't remember one of them.
Oh, ow.
I can't remember. I maybe one against early in the season where he hit the crossbar, but even the keeper's like, that's going wide, and it just happened to dip at the last second. I think if he can hone in the box-to-box midfield part, where aside from the shooting, and Maxi can keep his offensive intensity up, and Pato can recreate his goal-scoring efficiency he had against teams like Charleston and Atlanta earlier on, I think they have a very good chance to upset this team. It would be an upset. We're not going to like pretend like it's an even match, sure, but it's a 2 playing a 7. The 7 wins is an upset almost automatically. But I think it's not all is not lost. I know that I sound very doom and gloom because I'm very much a realist at times, and I'm also a pessimist, but it's not lost. Detroit have won much more lopsided games. This is not me putting the flower on the top of their grave right now. But I will say it'll be a very tough game if they do not control the offense. If they do not control Philip Goodrum, do not let him be an irritant. They do not control Aaron Malloy and stop him from dictating the pace of the game, getting the game kind of going quickly. It'll be a very long game for them.
All right, as we're recording this, there are not odds out for the Memphis-Detroit match, but 538 gives Detroit City FC a 31% chance of making the quarterfinals. So that's definitely odds in Memphis's favor.
As it should be. Memphis earned that right through their great play through the regular season. We should not take that away from them. And I know there are some really, really crazy Detroit City FC fans who love their club, but we need to also respect our opponent here because Memphis is a very solid squad. And if you do not respect them, they will slap you around the field. And no one listening to this wants that unless they live in Tennessee, which case, hello, and
thank you for listening.
Stop listening to our secrets.
What is your sense with like the vibe? You look at Fop Mob and stuff like that.
I'm someone who likes to watch the game and say, you see the meme on Twitter where it's like stat nerd and someone who's like, he's got that dog in him. I'm really more of the latter than the former, but I need numbers to kind of help me form some small opinion. And looking at numbers makes me feel like they're going to get blown out, but I know that they aren't because I know they have players who can control the tempo. And when they play their best, it does not matter what the numbers say. It's just looking at numbers makes me feel a little bit anxious for it. If I was a fan, I'd be like, I don't like how good their offense is, against our defense. I like our defense really well, but we make mistakes. And like I said, the game against Miami, they had 3 players made 1 mistake. It resulted in 1 goal.
And it's all it took.
You can't do that because that game ended 1-0, and that was the end of the game. The game really stopped at that point. Like there was still some creativeness later, but the game really ended when that goal went in at the end of the first half. If you lose a header on a free kick or something or whatever, that's effort-based. Okay, you tried, you just did not work. But you can't make a wrong read. You can't try to jump on an offsides trap and jump too late. You can't miss kick a ball and let the guy get behind you. Like, those things cannot happen, because if you do that against the quality sides, the Louisvilles, the Memphises, the San Antonios, they will make you pay. They'll take that one shot and they'll make it a goal, and then they'll deny you a clean chance at net.
Another thing, I don't know if you have any intel on Brad Dunwell and Stephen Carroll. Do we know anything yet, or is it too early?
I predict Stephen Carroll will play. After the game, he looked fine. He looked like they just held him out to be precaution. Brad Dunwell, I don't know, because before the game I saw him, he was wearing a walking boot in his foot. And it wasn't like a huge boot. It didn't go all the way up to like his shin or something, but it was the same foot he hurt earlier, and he was like a little anklet boot. And seeing someone walk around in that does not inspire faith in me that they'll be ready to play. But it could just be precaution, just to make sure he doesn't kick anything or anything of the sort. Maybe he just aggravated something during practice, and he's like, I just want to be safe and make sure I don't, watch a team play, step off, the bench too quickly and roll my ankle or something. So hopefully that's just precaution. Seeing him doubtful in the game against Miami made me scratch my head a little bit, because doubtful is not good. I mean, questionable is not great either, and Hopino ended up playing most of that game. But doubtful is like, we're trying to politely say that he won't be playing, but we just want to give you a little bit of hope. So I think Stephen Carroll will play. I'm fairly certain he will play. Brad Dunwell, I would like to say probably, but the boot gives me question for pause.
All right. It is the time. What do you think the score will be? I would give my prediction too.
2-1 Memphis.
All right.
I think Detroit puts together a plan very well. I think they executed for the most of the game, but I think they make too many mistakes in the back, and Memphis makes them pay for it. And you got to watch that little irritant Philip Goodrum run around the field with his very, very, very punchable face.
I think one of the top 5 most punchable faces in the USL Championship.
Yeah.
I'm going to go 1-0 Detroit. I think if Detroit pulls this out, it's going to be 1-0. And I feel like that's a reasonable pick.
I can't say 1-0. If I see Detroit winning, it's 2-1 Detroit. I cannot see them shutting out this Memphis team. Memphis gets way too much offensive pressure up the field to shut them out. If they're shutting him out, it's because Nate does his Tim Howard impersonation against Belgium and like makes 18 saves, which if that's the case, that's also very terrifying, because you don't want your keeper ever to make 18 saves in a game. But after the game with Miami, had that game not ended the way that it ended, even if they just draw in that game, I'd be more confident. But watching the disconnect issues there worries me. And Miami is not a great team, but like, they're good enough to get into the playoffs. I'm not taking that away from them. But Memphis is a very good team. So playing against those teams that, you give a mistake to, give a mouse a cookie, and what happens next? Like, the mouse scores on you. I don't have faith right now that that's going to be the case, but who knows? I've picked against Detroit a few times, and every time I've picked against them, for the most part, I've been wrong. So maybe this is a time for me to celebrate me being wrong. If you hear this, hear me saying this, maybe it means you're going to be advancing, in a 2-1 victory. Before we go, I want to say one quick thing. Shout out to Clarissa Shields of Flint, Michigan, retaining her 3 boxing titles after avenging her only loss in her boxing career against Savannah Marshall. She is currently 77-1, including her amateur and professional record. She now holds the WBA, WBC, IBF, WBF, and the Ring female middleweight titles. Won the WBO middleweight title while winning this fight. So she is a very scary individual, and I knew it before the match when some of Savannah Marshall's fans and family were heckling her during the thing. She's like, I wouldn't be talking to me like that. I'm a herder in the ring. I wouldn't be talking to me like that. And lo and behold, she won unanimous decision. So shouts out to her. Always happy to see people from Michigan doing great things.
All right, that is it for today's episode. Thanks to everyone behind the scenes who makes this happen. Thanks to our members at patreon.com/dailydetroit who keep this coverage free for all of you. As always, if you've got feedback, dailydetroit@gmail.com. With that, I'm Jer Stays.
And I'm Fletcher Sharp.
Remember that you are somebody, and we'll see you around Detroit.